Hello everyone, Mayday here. Hope you enjoy the video. Just going to do a quick short on the Queen's Gambit. This game was played 10 January, earlier in the morning, against an opponent called Blitz Chess. It's on Blitz Chess, 7-minute game. My opponent started out with d4, played d5. This is going into the Queen's Gambit, not quite the Queen's Gambit yet. c4, Queen's Gambit, and I normally like to accept it these days. D takes c4. And here, let's see, white has many options. There's e4, e3, knight f3 apparently, which is what the computer recommends the most, and there's other moves as well. But here, my opponent played knight c3, which is also a main move in the opening, but a move that I like to see because I always hit it with the engine line. Well, it's engine line slash theory, but e5 move that you can get away with because taking will allow you to trade queens, and then I'm going to be able to get back this pawn regardless with knight c6, and while they're tracking down this pawn, I'll be getting their pawn. So this is fine for black if they decide to take. So they didn't take, and sometimes they'll play d5 here, which is the most common move I've played, and then here I'll continue knight f6, and then e4, and then b5, and most of the time they'll play knight takes b5, in which I'll play knight takes e4, and pretty much stop here. But if they continue, they take on c4 after bishop b4. Black is just doing a lot better, and mainly due to the pressure on the king, and the king has to move to f1 according to the engine. So what they should do instead back here, instead of taking on b5, they should play bishop g5, and this gets a little sharp with bishop c5. Luckily I haven't faced this yet, but I'm studying, so bishop c5 is what I'm going to play next, so that's good for me to see at least. Alright, so that didn't happen in the game. d5 didn't happen. Instead they played the more solid, probably the top move, e3. E3 just simply supports the pawn, gets ready to recapture on c4, and white is going to continue development with knight f3, and most likely this bishop's going to get out to f4 or g5 because I'm probably going to take on d4 at some point, which I do right away, and then e takes d4, and now the two main moves are knight f6 and knight c6. Knight f6 is slightly more preferred, mainly just developing and getting rid of the castle, and knight c6 could walk right into d5. So after knight c6, d5 is an option, and I had seen this and I was like, oh, it'll be fine, I'll just go to e5 where I'm defending the pawn, and I wasn't really afraid of a move like f4, which really weakens the king side for black. It's going to give me a lot of compensation, especially for just one pawn. So we're up a pawn at this point, because this is the Queen's Gambit, and white is yet to get the gambited pawn back yet. So right now we're still in the opening stages of the game. So instead of that d5, they played bishop e3, just simply defending the pawn. And of course I can't take it because right now they have two defenders, and I only have two attackers, so that would favor me at the end of that. And we're, if you count the pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I have 7 pawns, so I'm up a pawn still, but that's about to change. So I just developed knight f6, and they get their pawn back. And now I look down and I'm like, well, okay, well, we have a game here. I'm just going to finish development. I'm going to get these bishops out somewhere. I'm going to castle, and look at these open files that I have. I got the open d file and the open e file. Of course, my opponents also have those files, but the only difference is they have this weak pawn on c4 or d4, which this is known theory. This isn't anything new. It's a weakness, but it's also sort of an advantage because while black is dancing around trying to get this pawn back, white, if they can ever push it, or they can ever clamp a piece on this e5 square with the pawn, then they're going to be able to get an attack. And so it's a double-edged position in spite of the fact that they have the isolated pawn. So we just continue with development. There's only a few master games that come from this position. I don't know if it's probably because of this rare at master level knight c3 move back here at move 3. But regardless of the reason, there's only a few games from this position, and most of them went bishop d6. Or so, but in this position, I went bishop e7, just calmly developing, getting ready to castle, and at this point, not really seeing the reason to put the bishop on d6 and potentially allow d6 to happen. So knight f3, castle, castle, just simple development moves. And here, I briefly considered getting the bishop out, say to g4 or f5, but to me, it doesn't seem like the bishop has any more scope on these squares than it does on the starting square, so I didn't really see a point of moving it. So instead, I went with the typical plan that we have here of blockading this pawn. So I played knight b4 is actually a novelty. Well, in master games it is, but online it's been played a few times, and most of the time white wins actually. So we're talking about higher games of like 2200 and above on Blitz Chess. So why is it a novelty, and what are the main moves here? Well, the main moves here would be knight a5, or attacking the bishop on c4, or bishop f5, which are both good moves, and I really didn't consider either one of those. My idea with knight b4 is to stop the d5 pawn from happening, from d4 pawn from pushing to d5, and to trade off pieces. And of course, it worked out well for me in this game, but the funny thing is that there's many moves that the computer likes here, actually. One of them is knight e5 and queen b3, but another one that I was trying to prevent is just simply d5. And you're like, wait, I was trying to stop d5 by playing knight b4, and it actually doesn't even stop d5, and it's actually a good move. Not a bad move, but it's interesting because it's not the preferred line for the engine. But, so what do? This knight can't go anywhere. It seems to be trapped. I mean, you don't really want to go to a6. You can't go here, so what do? Well, the computer says, nah, this is fine. You just have to play b5. And, oh, okay. Now, you can distract one of these pieces away, and then you can recapture the pawn. Or, you play c6, and then if anything happens, you have another attacker, and you can take back on d5 with the knight. So this could have happened in the game, and in fact, it would have been very, thematic for that to happen. But it didn't happen in the game. Instead, the opponent played a simple move, a3, which at first sight doesn't really seem to do anything. There might be a deeper reason to it, but it's like my knight already wanted to jump to d5, so why encourage my knight to go to d5 while at the same time just making holes in your position? But it's not a bad move. And instead, let's see what we wanted to do instead. Probably just a developing move, knight e5, queen b3, something like that, or d5. But instead, a3 was played, and I just happily jumped into d5. And here, again, literally almost any developing move, queen or rook c1, rook e1, queen d2, queen d3, queen c2, queen b3, like almost anything's good here. Bishop e2, bishop d3, like bishop g5, like anything works here almost. But instead, they take on d5, which is again not a bad move, but this is kind of the whole plan in the beginning when I played knight b4, was hey, I want to put a knight on d5 so I can stop my opponent from pushing the pawn and trade off as many pieces as possible, because they still have this weak isolated pawn, and if I can get them to trade off that pawn, or trade all the pieces off, then I'll be able to attack all my I'll be able to harness all my fury against that pawn. So they trade off that knight, and then I happily retake with my knight, and the engine says everything is equal. And if they would dare to keep trading off pieces, and especially give me the bishop pair with bishop takes d5, I would be so happy. But from this point on, both players played pretty well. There weren't really any mistakes. We just played simple chess here. H3 preventing bishop d4 forever, and I just developed the bishop to e6. strengthening the knight a little bit just in case I wanted to move the queen so that I don't have to take back with the pawn and get rid of their isolated pawn, or not isolated, but have a piece in front of it where it's going to be harder to attack it. Queen d2, developing h6. Right now, you'll see that mainly to stop knight g5, but there's another idea that we play later. Knight e5, and now I'm like, okay, they're trying to play f4. Now white is getting their attack, but I'm not as afraid because we've already traded off one pair of minor pieces, or at least one minor piece, so it's not the end of the world, and I still have my bishop here. And I don't really see an attack yet, so I'm not worried. So I just developed the queen, d6, and they take, and I don't understand why they gave it the bishop pair, but then after I take back and they played bishop f4, attacking the queen, I realized that they probably saw this move and they're like, oh wow, I can trade off the bishop, and then I could play bishop f4, and then, oh wow, oh, this is so good. But I mean, I just said nope, I'm just gonna take the queen back, and I have the bishop pair, and I'm doing alright. So now f3 was played, which the engine really doesn't like, and the move h6 combined with the move queen d8 have my main idea that was able to accomplish right here, and that was bishop g5, which according to the engine is the only dubious move, or not a mistake, but the only slightly inaccurate move that I played the entire game. And they don't like this move. The engine rather would prefer to go bishop h4 and then rook c3, and goes on and says, yeah, black is still better and this is good. But after bishop g5 and the line that ensues, which is engine line as well, black is totally fine, and in fact they're just a little bit better. So I don't really see why the engine didn't like this move as much, and we don't really worry about what the engine thinks as much as long as we're following the right ideas. And the idea of this was to trade off pieces, and I don't even care about the double pawns here that could happen, and trading queens. I mean, I'm still trying to win this position because now I have a strong bishop here that can't really be kicked away. Don't really have any weaknesses besides these double pawns, which aren't very weak. I mean, and you look at this silly pawn structure right here, and again, they still have this weakness here on d4, and they were not able to push the pawn. So now we pile up all the pieces on it, and it seems like we're going to be able to eventually win that pawn. And that's really the whole point of the whole maneuvers that we had in the opening. Now this knight dances around. All these are good moves. Again, we're pretty much playing perfectly most of the game here. We have a little dance of knights and bishop, and bring the king in slightly. Apparently I could have played b6 a little bit earlier, but I didn't really want to create any weaknesses for any reason. We're still moving places, and now finally b6. And now they bring the knight in, I bring the knight here, and here, so we moved around a lot, and somehow we reach an equal position. I mean, that's just how it happens. They've got two rooks. You're trying to fight for a win, but the engine says, okay, things are equal. But we're human players. We don't give up. We're going to keep fighting. We're just going to say, oh, this is a draw. The engine says 0-0. No one's looking at the engine when you're playing the game. So, of course, we're looking at this, and I'm thinking, okay, I might lose. I don't want to lose a pawn. I don't want to ruin my pawn structure. I also don't want to take the pawn this way because I don't want to get rid of the weakness here. And I'm going to lose the bishop. So, what am I going to do? Well, they attack the pawn, and I have to defend it. And they take there, and here is the key moment where I have to decide, do I take with the rook, which you can take the rook here, rook takes, and then rook takes d4, and it's very drawish. You've got these weak pawns over here, which are now more weak because of the situation of the game. They have two rooks. You have two rooks, two pawns against two pawns, three pawns against three pawns on the queen side here, king side here, and it looks very drawish. In fact, as long as we both keep our two rooks, I mean, I don't think either one of us could really win this game. So I didn't want to go for that. Instead, I took with the pawn on d5, c takes d5, and the engine says, okay, now white is just slightly better. For the first time since knight c3, white is just slightly better. And I'm like, okay, well, they no longer have this weakness, but we've got two rooks, And if you see the time, we have 3 minutes 52 seconds, and that they have 3 minutes 19 seconds. Still have a lot of time. There was no increment in this game, but we just had so much time, and the moves are simple. So maybe let's fight for a draw. So they bring the rook down on the 7th rank, and I bring the rook up. I'm not really worried about the check because I'll just bring the rook back. And then they bring the rook over here, which I think at this point it's starting to decide the game in my favor because I bring the king closer. My king's going to be a lot closer than theirs. And then they decide to take, which is not a bad move. We went from white being slightly better to white being just equal. And now after this sequence, things are okay, but my king's slightly closer. I'm actually looking to trade off these rooks and then get my king over to this side of the board. So they bring their king in as well, and then I bring the rook over, trying to go for that plan, and then the decisive blunder of the game, rook c3, which it looks at first sight like a good move because rook takes rook, and then pawn takes, which is what's going to happen in the game, so I might as well play it. But now they are defending this pawn for the first time with another pawn, so it's no longer isolated, but it's hanging pawn. And if there were other minor pieces, this would be dangerous because we could always attack it. But since we just have kings left, of course, the opponent probably thought, well, this is okay. The only issue with that is, if you look here, we've got 3 moves to get to this weak 8 pawn, and they have 4 moves, and they're not going to get there in time, so they're pretty much going to lose that pawn, and that's going to decide the whole game. So we made a few more moves, brought the king closer, and then f5, bam. Really important that these pawns want to eventually try to push to get a pass pawn, but you see the double pawns do a good job of stopping that because let's say this pawn came up here, I would take it, and then if this pawn was here trying to retake to try to push through, it's still not passed because there's still one more pawn here blocking. So the double pawns do a really good job of preventing white from making a pass pawn on the king side, and again, that is what decides the game because white is not able to make a pass pawn and get any sort of counterplay whatsoever. So we make a few moves, we move pawns, move the king closer, and then I just start slowly taking my time here and trying to get my opponent to Zugzwang, where we call that where they have no good move and then they have to let my king in and then the game's over. So here, at this point, the computer says completely winning. It is mate in 23, which if I played perfectly and they played perfectly, that would happen. But again, we're not injured, so we're not expecting that to happen. But this would be a good place to resign almost for white because there's literally nothing else to do. And after they recapture, the best move is supposed to be king d3, which I wanted to play safe, and I didn't really see a reason to let their king come forward. But that was supposed to be the strongest move, but nevertheless we went forward. This is still mate in, I don't know, 25, 27, something like that. It's still good, and we're slowly trying to get them out of moves. They've only got carefully 1 move here and a king move somewhere, and after they make the one final good move, I bring my pawn in and there's no more moves left for them. If they go here, I go here. If they go here, I go here, and then that king can't go here, can't go here. So what do? You're about to lose this pawn here. So at this point, they made 1 more move. It's pretty much resignation in itself because they just gave up the c pawn, and the game was over. So hope you enjoy this game. It's just short game. Really talking about the Queen's Gambit. Some people would find it boring because, oh man, like Queen's Gambit, oh, it was all d4. Like you should have played e4 if you wanted to have an exciting game, but I thought it was enjoyable, especially with the middle game ideas and the isolated queen pawn. And for once, I had an opening, a middle game, and an end game, which is crazy because normally when I play pool, I don't have that. So hope you enjoy this short game, and we'll see you next time.